Hello and welcome to this live read of Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nimh by Robert C. O'Brien. Today we'll be reading chapters 10 and 11 of the text. Well, let's begin. Chapter 10, Isabella. Mrs. Frisby spelled it out slowly. The plan of the Rats of Nimh. What or where was Nimh? The name had a strange and far-away sound. Had these rats then come here from someplace else? Did that explain why they had books and electric lights and wires and an electric motor? Yet they had been here, or at least there had been rats here, for as long as she could remember. Still, that was not so very long. She wondered what other things they had. Suddenly she had an almost overwhelming desire to look around, to see what was behind the other doors and down the other corridors. She went to the door, opened it, and looked out into the hall. It was entirely deserted and silent, except that when she listened carefully she could hear a faint humming in the distance, as if something were running. Maybe another motor? She started out into the hall, and then changed her mind. Better not. Nicodemus had been friendly. They had all been friendly, but explicit. He had said that she was to wait in the library, and she was not there to pry, but to get help. She went back into the library, closed the door, and sat on one of the benches. The books on the tables were mostly paperbacks, small enough so that the rats could handle them easily enough, but too big for her. So she sat in front of the blackboard and looked at it again. Beneath the title, across the top, in neatly chalked handwriting, were columns of words and figures. Schedule. January. Group 1, 10 oats, 30 loads. Group 2, 10 wheat, 30 loads. Group 3, 10 corn, 20 loads. Group 4, 10 miscellaneous seeds. The rest of the blackboard was filled with more rows of figures, each headed by the name of a month: February, March, April, May, and so on through July. At the bottom of a separate square was ruled off plows, Arthur's group, 14. Plow number 2, complete, January 1st. Plow number 3, complete, February 10th. Plow number 4, complete, March 20th. Mrs. Frisby stared at all of this, trying to make head or tail of it, but she could not. It was quite incomprehensible. She was still puzzling over it when the door opened and a rat came in. It was a girl rat, small and quite young, judging by her looks. She was carrying a pencil and some papers and looking at the papers as she walked, so she didn't see Mrs. Frisby at first. When she did, she gasped and dropped the papers, scattering them on the floor, her eyes opened wide. "Who are you?" she asked. "I don't know you. How did you get in?" She backed toward the door. "It's all right," said Mrs. Frisby. "I'm a friend of Mr. Age's." The rat was very young indeed, only a child. "But why are you here? Who let you in?" "Nicodemus. He told me to wait here." The girl rat looked doubtful. "You might be a spy." "A spy? How could I be? A spy from where?" "I don't know, from outside. Maybe from Nimh?" "I don't even know what Nimh is." "Well, that's what you'd say, but I don't." "What is it?" asked Mrs. Frisby, feeling slightly annoyed. "It's a place," the girl rat, her alarm apparently subsiding, began, picking up her scattered papers. "I'm supposed to be practicing my reading." "What kind of a place?" "It's where we came from." "I don't know too much about it. I've never been there." "Well, how can you come from there if you've never been there?" "My father and mother did. I was born afterward. I think it's white. Anyway, I know one thing. We don't want to go back. We don't want to get caught." So Mrs. Frisby thought. That sounds as if, whatever Nimh was, the rats had escaped from it to come here. But she realized that she was not likely to get very clear information from such a child. Again, she hoped that Nicodemus would explain it. "Did Nicodemus come from Nimh too?" "Yes." "And Justin?" "Yes. You know Justin?" "Yes." "Well, I guess you're not a spy," said the girl rat. She sounded mildly disappointed. And then she added irrelevantly, "Justin's not married." She climbed on one of the benches and opened a book. "He's the best one of all. He's not even afraid of dragon." She read in the book for perhaps 30 seconds, picked up her pencil, and then put it down again. I'm too young to get married. I suppose so, said Mrs. Frisby, for a while yet, but that won't last long. That's what my mother says, but it seems long, and Justin might marry somebody else. Maybe not, said Mrs. Frisby, who could see beyond the tip of her nose. He's pretty young himself yet. What's your name? Isabella. It's a pretty name. It's all right, only my brothers call me Izzy. I don't like that. Oh, I don't wonder. Where's your brother? At the meeting. He's older. All the men are at the meeting, but my mother didn't go. The mothers don't always go. She's in the grain room packing grain. Packing grain? For the plan. She doesn't like the plan, though. The plan again, Mrs. Frisby thought. What is the plan? Why doesn't she like it? It's just the plan for where we're going to live and all that. She doesn't like it because she says it's too hard. No more electric lights, no more refrigerator, no more running water. But she isn't deserting or anything, not like Jenner. We didn't like Jenner. Who's Jenner? He was in the group, but he quit. Maybe he went back to Nimh. We don't know. Mrs. Frisby was gradually getting a picture of life in the rat colony, a somewhat confusing one, because Isabella was a child, but nonetheless certain things were apparent. They had a grain room. The females sometimes went to meetings and sometimes not. Nicodemus seemed to be the leader. They had a plan for the future that some rats did not like, and one named Jenner had deserted. Or had others gone with him? She was about to ask Isabella when the library door opened, and Nicodemus, Justin, and Mr. Ages entered. Another rat came with them, a stranger. Chapter 11. A Powder for Dragon. The strange rat was named Arthur. He was stocky, square, and muscular, with bright, hard eyes. He looked efficient. You might call him our chief engineer, said Nicodemus to Mrs. Frisby, as indeed you might call Justin the captain of the guard, if we had any such titles, but we don't. Mr. Ages thought Arthur should come along, though he didn't say why, so we still don't know what your problem is. Isabella was gone. She had dropped her papers on the floor again when the others had entered, and Justin, to her intense confusion and visible delight, had helped her pick them up. Hello, Izzy, he had said. How's the reading coming? It's fine, she said. I finished the 3rd reader last week. Now I'm on the 4th. The 4th reader already? You're getting quite grown up. At that, she had almost dropped the papers a 3rd time and made a dash for the door. It didn't matter. Mrs. Frisby noticed if Justin called her Izzy, just so he called her something. Nicodemus closed the door behind her, then sat down on one of the benches facing Mrs. Frisby. The others sat down too, Mr. Ages spreading his splinted leg in front of him. Nicodemus took the reading glass from his satchel, opened it, and through it gravely examined Mrs. Frisby's face. You will forgive the glass and the scrutiny, he said. When I lost my left eye, I also damaged the right one. I can see little close up without this glass. Indeed, not very much even with it. At length he folded the glass and put it on the table. Now, he said, what is it that we can do to help you? So Mrs. Frisby recounted once more the events that led her to coming here, and at the end repeated what the owl had advised her to say. Move the house into the lee of the stone. She added, I don't understand just what he meant by that, but Jeremy, the crow, he says it means the side where there's no wind. But what good would that do? I think I know what he meant, said Nicodemus, in a broad sense. Lee means the sheltered side. A bird flying over Mr. Fitzgibbon's garden would notice something most of us would miss. He reached into his satchel and took out a sheet of paper and a pencil. He opened the reading glass again, and as he talked, he drew a sketch. When a farmer plows a field with a big rock in it, he plows around the rock, close on each side, but leaving a triangle of unplowed land on each end. Mrs. Frisby's house is beside the rock, and will get plowed up, and probably crushed, as the owl said. But if we can move it a few feet so it lies buried behind the rock in the lee, then she and her children can stay in it as long as they need to. From the air, the way the owl sees it, the garden would look like this. He inspected the sketch through the reading glass and then placed it on the table. Mrs. Frisby climbed up on the bench and looked at it. It was a rough map, showing the garden, the big stone near the middle, and the way the furrows made by the plow would curve around it, rather like waves around a boat. "Show me where your house is buried," said Nicodemus. Mrs. Frisby pointed to the spot on the sketch. "I know where that cinder block is," said the rat named Arthur. "In fact, I thought about bringing it in, but I decided it was too long a haul. They had it tied on top of the harrow for weight, and it fell off just as they were finishing the garden." "Can you move it?" asked Nicodemus, pointing at the sketch. "To this spot right here, and bury it again." "Yes," said Arthur. "That shouldn't be hard." Mrs. Frisby was delighted. Looking at the map, it all became clear, and she could see what a beautifully simple idea it was. When Mr. Fitzgibbon plowed, it would go right past their house. They would not have to move until Timothy was well, and until the weather was truly warm. She remembered again what her husband had said, how easy to unlock a door when you have the key. She had found the key. Or rather, the owl had found it. Nicodemus asked Arthur, "How long will it take?" "It depends. With a party of 10, a couple hours. With 20, maybe an hour." "Well, we can spare 20, but it's still too long." He looked worried, and so did Arthur. "Yeah, we'll have to work at night, but even so, there's just no cover at all. It's wide open." "We'll have to take care of Dragon," said Justin. "Yes," said Mr. Ages, "and with this leg I can't do it. I'll never make it to the bowl, much less get back." Mrs. Frisby, looking at their baffled faces, felt her delight subsiding. Obviously something was wrong. "I don't understand," she said. "I know about Dragon, of course, but—" "At night," said Justin, "Dragon prowls the farmyard like a tiger. You don't see him until he's on top of you." "Then you can't move my house after all." "Well," Justin sighed, "ordinarily—" He turned to Nicodemus. "Should I explain it to her?" "Yes," said Nicodemus. "Ordinarily," said Justin, "when we have a long project to do at night, sometimes even by day, we make sure Dragon won't bother us. We put sleeping powder in his food. Mr. Ages makes it. It doesn't do the cat any harm, but he stays extremely drowsy for the next 8 hours or so. We station a sentry to watch him, and we're free to work." "You did that yesterday," cried Mrs. Frisby, remembering the figures toiling the wire through the grass, remembering how strangely disinterested Dragon had seemed when he saw her. "I saw the cat sleeping in the yard." "Yes," said Justin, "but today Mr. Ages has a broken leg." "Well, then he can't make the powder?" "It isn't that," said Mr. Ages. "I've plenty of the powder." "The trouble is," said Justin, "it's Mr. Ages who puts it in Dragon's dinner bowl, inside the farm kitchen. With his leg broken, he can't move fast enough." "But why Mr. Ages?" said Mr. Frisby. "Can't someone else do it?" "I'd be glad to do it myself," Justin, "but I'm too big." "You see," Nicodemus exclaimed, "Mrs. Fitzgibbon feeds the cat in the morning and in the evening, and his bowl is always kept in the same place, next to a cabinet in one corner of the kitchen. There's a very shallow space between the floor and the bottom of the cabinet. A few years ago, when we conceived of the idea of putting Dragon to sleep, we cut a hole in the floor, just behind the cabinet. If we put it anywhere else, they'd see it. To reach the bowl, Mr. Ages crawls under the cabinet, and when he gets to the edge, he makes a quick dash to the bowl, drops it in the powder, and dashes back, out of sight. But with a broken leg, he can't dash." "We might try leaving some bait outside the house," said Justin. "That worked once." Once out of a dozen times," said Nicodemus. "It isn't dependable, and we don't have much time. To be safe, we ought to move that block tonight." "If only we had some cat food," said Justin, thinking aloud. "He might eat that, even on the porch, because he knows it's his. Maybe tonight I could go in through the attic and down to the kitchen." "It's no use," said Mr. Ages. "They keep it in a meal cabinet up on the wall. You couldn't get it without a crew, and that would make too much noise." "Anyway," said Nicodemus, "it would put off moving the block until tomorrow night." "Well then," Justin said, "I guess what we do is stake out scouts wherever we can, try to keep track of Dragon, and hope for the best. Some nights it doesn't go near the garden at all. We might be lucky." "Or we might not," said Arthur. "I don't like it. We can't dig that block out without some noise." Mrs. Frisby interrupted quietly. "There is another way. If Mr. Aegis can get into the kitchen, so can I. If you give me that powder and show me the way, I will put it in Dragon's bowl." Justin said quickly, "No, it's no job for a lady." "You forget," Mrs. Frisby said. "I'm Timothy's mother. If you and Arthur and others in your group can take risks to save him, surely I can too. And consider this. I don't want any of you to be hurt, maybe even killed by Dragon. But even more, I don't want the attempt to fail. Perhaps the worst that will happen to you with luck is that you'll have to scatter and run and leave my house unmoved. But then what will happen to us? Timothy will die. So if there is no one else to put the cat to sleep, I must do it." Nicodemus considered, and then spoke. "She's right, of course. If she chooses to take the risk, we can't deny her the right." And to Mrs. Frisby he added, "But you should know that the danger is great. It was in the same kitchen yesterday, running from Dragon's bowl, that Mr. Ages got his leg broken. And it was doing the same thing last year that your husband died." Well, that's the end of that chapter. Come back tomorrow at 1:30. We'll read the next 2 chapters of Mrs. Frisby and the Rats of Nimh. I hope you've enjoyed this reading. I hope you get outside and enjoy the beautiful sunshine. And I hope you stay healthy and safe. I'll see you next time.